Welcome to the Boss It podcast. As always, I'm going to be talking to somebody that I think will be of great interest to many of you in the software world. One of the conversations that I've been continually having is, where is the software sector now? And I think that there's a fundamental change happening, not about to happen. And I think it's going to happen. It's happening very, very quickly. And it will have an effect right the way across the software sector. And what it is, it's about a fusion of these newer technologies, things that have been spoken about for some time, but actually are coming to reality now. There's been a lot of hype, which actually gets in the way, and I think it tends to make people cynical, but there is a real value in the things that I'm starting to see, the software technologies that are being demonstrated to me, you know, for a veteran in the sector. When I actually enjoy the demonstration, it says something, because I've seen so many over my career. Sometimes it can be a bit of a repetition, but there's some amazing technology around artificial intelligence, around RPA, knowledge graph, and some of the things that we're seeing regarding blockchain. So Christian de Vartavan, welcome to the Boss It podcast. Give a quick intro about yourself, because there was a number of things. When I saw your profile, I wanted to reach out to you, and I'd seen that you had done some work in this area, and you'd done some work with the UK government creating some reports. So give a bit of a sort of a quick overview of yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Well, thank you for having me first, Mark. Thank you very much. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs. We have 300 years of recorded entrepreneurship. In fact, at the beginning, a long time ago, in the 1700s, we started with tobacco trading, and then it went down. And at one point, for a long time, we had a concrete technology company. I actually saw its birth in 1971. And my father became a technologist in a way. He filed the first patent, invented a number of ways of doing different things with concrete. And this is where I learned about technology. My first job when I was 12 years old was in his company in France, actually. Wow. My first paycheck. And yes. I worked with him on and off. And I don't know if you're also aware, I've had a long career in Egyptology and archaeology, which very few people know about. But
no, I didn't know that. No, we'll have to dive into that one. We'll dig that one up, shall we say?
Yes. So I've been between one and the other. And at one point between 2000 and 2004, I was director of communication in our family company, so concrete technology, and I became vice president. So I got a sense of how you look at problems differently, where you look for technology to solve problems that others cannot solve. And this is how I got into technology. Now, I continued later on my Egyptology career, then went off it in 2016, because I thought I had done enough, 10 books, 40 scientific discoveries, which most people in their lifetime do a few. So I thought I had enough, and I came back to the UK and created my own consultancy in the blockchain technology. It just happened that my best friend had a blockchain technology company and actually got me a job with a Czech blockchain technology company where I became a global ambassador because precisely of my academic background and what they were trying to do, connecting blockchain with universities. They wanted a white paper, and they wanted someone who could bridge the technology world with the academic world. So I started as head of academic relations, but soon became global ambassador. I became global ambassador of Decent, and then I became global ambassador of Public, while gradually building up my own consultancy in London. So we're in 2017, at the very beginning, well, not the beginning of Bitcoin, but at the time when precisely Bitcoin became a big thing. And in fact, Decent made one of the most successful ICO in history, and their cash flow was between $50 to $100 million at any time, depending on the position of Bitcoin. And this is how things developed. With public, we actually competed in Parliament in the, there was a competition about showing use cases of the blockchain technology, and we actually won in the media category in 2019. Thereafter, my best friend ran into difficulties with his company and had to license a number of people. That was just December 2019. 2019, and then I decided to go on my own with my own consultancy, and of course then COVID came in, and it didn't help very much. But the fact is, I continue. It's growing. Of course, there was I had a few very interesting projects before lockdown. Many of them stalled, others disappeared. I think that's the story of many companies and startups. We have to do what it is. Now I'm back, picking up the pieces, developing new technologies. I have an MVP with blockchain technology for a certification, which I'm developing with a law firm, which is well known. It's under NDA. I can't disclose it for the time being. Sure. But so this is the point where I am. I advise, of course, as you said, UK government, particularly Parliament. I'm a member of the all-party parliamentary groups, that's APPG for blockchain since 4 years, of AI, which is led by Lord Clement Jones since 3 years. And the past few days I've been invited at the events concerning the metaverse, because the metaverse is the next thing. And you were talking about hype. I mean, we can see how we were before lockdown in the hype concerning AI. Not yet for blockchain. Now the hype for blockchain has finished, and we're about to have the hype for quantum computing. And yes, this is how it goes. So you have to understand where you fit, or where your work fits within the curve of hype, decline, and real use. That's exactly it.
So how, when you're thinking about yourself now, how do you see yourself? Are you sort of very much just focused on blockchain, or are you bridging that gap in a number of other areas as well?
Yes, it is exactly what I do. I bridge in many other areas. In fact, Projectus is a consultancy still for the time being. That is, I advise concerning the use for business uses of blockchain, AI, the IPFS. I don't know if you've heard about the IPFS. Most people haven't. And now there is the metaverse, about which I'm learning like everyone else. But I'm trying to bridge all these technologies to be usable for a business to enhance its capabilities. And yeah, sorry.
Do you think that a big part of that is being able to translate the understanding of these technologies from a technological perspective to that of a businessman, and then the average day user potentially? Because I mean, it would be interesting to get the layman's guide, for instance. I'm talking to a technical audience here, but I tend to find that there are also gaps in even very, very technical people. For instance, I'm talking to some highly technical people working in one particular area who have built a very sophisticated platform, but I introduced the idea of RPA, and I'd assumed that they knew. Their focus is so laser-like. Their knowledge on that area wasn't great, and they were unfamiliar. So it would be useful to get perhaps a layman's guide to what is blockchain.
Exactly.
And why does it excite you?
Well, I know your listeners can't see it, but with 17 other CEOs, we've pulled the book out during lockdown called Blockchain Impact. And the first interest of the book is that for the first time in history, for a printed book, it's not just a book about blockchain, it is a block of the blockchain. If you look at the back, you can see hashes. So the IP, the intellectual property of the book, has been hashed, transferred to the blockchain, and you've got the block number. So this is a block of the blockchain. What's the use of that? It's that authors the authors know exactly how many copies were printed, and let's say there would have been royalties, which is not the case. There were, everybody was, worked for free for the book. Then the author could very easily check how many copies have been printed, calculate his own royalties, and this is very good for protecting authors' rights. And I made a speech in Parliament about that. In fact, if you go to YouTube, you will see that during one of the APPG blockchain session, I proposed a new law that printers, not publishers, actually print in the book the number of copies they print of any book, so that authors can calculate their royalties, because unfortunately many publishers are not very honest and don't pay any royalties whatsoever under the clause of net sales. Net sales means basically once you've paid yourself champagne, travels abroad, and etc., there's nothing left for the authors. What it should be is on book price. You sell one book, then you get 10% on price, on the book price, so if etc. So if you sell a book for £10, the author gets £1, and that's fair. And it needs to be protected. This is where blockchain is very useful. Blockchain is about the security of data, the transparency of the use of the data and its management. And this data can be anything: pictures, photograph, NFTs, text, the text of a book, anything that can be digitalized and transformed into a numerical form. And this is where blockchain is powerful. If you have a company, it's a question of understanding that it not only secures the data, it makes your client more comfortable, but it speeds up incredibly the transaction and between one party and the other, particularly if there are multiple parties. And this is why blockchain excels in supply chain. Because if you have a bunch of bananas you want to transport from Costa Rica to Europe, nowadays it's about, I don't know how many layers of paperwork you have to prepare for the container, for the freight on board, etc. With the blockchain, by the time you've said a bunch of bananas, the actual paperwork is over, and everybody's actually seen, all the parties have actually seen, stages by stages what has been done, and can be verified on a blockchain explorer, for example. That they were shipped at that time, they were transported off the boat at that time, delivered at that time, sold at that time, and you can even track the actual goods themselves with a barcode. All of this on a single chain. All of this with the blockchain is making sure that nobody can tamper with it. So to go back to what, precisely because we're talking about banana, I think the good example to explain blockchain is it's a bit like an old grocer's spike. Do you remember the spikes when we were young? We used to go to the grocer's shop and there was this spike, and then you would pay something, and then the grocer would take the bill and just put it on the spike, and then the next person would come, would put another bill, and then the third. Well, the thing is, you couldn't pull off the bills which were on the spike because they were stacked on top of each other. Now imagine every one of these bills would be connected to each other by a hash. A hash is an algorithm, transforms the digital information in a series of numbers, and this series of numbers constitutes a hash. So every bill has a hash, and more than that, every hash connects the one bill to the previous one, and so on, which means that if you pull out one of the bills, then all the others lit up, because in fact you've broken the chain, or you tried to tamper with the chain. And that's blockchain. It's basically blocks are tied to each other, containing a very small a hash, which contains the transaction, the hashing with an algorithm of the content of the book. For example, its transaction, the hash to transfer it to the chain itself, and then you get a block number, date stamp, and you know that this IP, this text, this photograph has been transferred to that block on that day, and that block has been tied to the previous one and will be tied to the one coming next. And all of this constitutes the chain. And this chain is visible by everybody around the world. Whoever has a computer and can use a blockchain explorer for a specific blockchain, I mean, you need to know on which blockchain it is, then you can check that everything is fine. So this is a blockchain, and it was invented by two American scientists, one called Dr. Scott Stonetta, the other one Dr. Stuart Haber in 1991. And in fact, in Blockchain Impact, I have, because Scott and I have had 100 emails exchanged, basically, I was able to make the first resume of the birth of the blockchain technology prior to the intelligent use of the technology by Satoshi Nakamoto in 2008. And this is at that point that the blockchain technology became famous, because in 1991, you were talking about document management earlier on, but this is exactly how it was born. Scott and Stuart were working for Xerox, and they were actually finding a way to date stamp documents. Excuse me.
Sure.
And in fact, the longest existing blockchain in the world appears every Thursday in the New York Times since 1991. They have actually condensed all of Xerox document in a single hash, and they have kept it going. For many years, nobody cared about blockchain. Nobody could see the point of it, except some people who were, very advanced. But then Satoshi Nakamoto, whoever he is, whether it's one person or several, a bunch of people, actually found that the blockchain would be ideal to create a digital currency. And this is how they produced this white paper in 2008, announcing the birth of the Bitcoin and the blockchain. It's the first time in the comments of the code you see mentioning blockchain, and also actually citing out of in the note 6 references, the work by Scott Stonetta and Stuart Haber. And what happened at that point is that a technology that nobody really cared about had a great use in the financial sector, and it was a new way to handle money as we, at that point, it's still the old version of how we understand fiat currencies. But then he creates the first digital currency. And this is where blockchain technology literally explodes. That is, a lot of people get it immediately. They see the use of a decentralized digital currency, and the rest is history. The rest is, of course, it didn't, it wasn't immediate, the success. I would say that the Bitcoin, of course, in post 2017, rocketed so between 2008 and 2017, almost 10 years. The progress was slow for the people who were initiated, those who actually understood what the blockchain technology could do. But then suddenly it picked up, and we saw, of course, the explosion of the value of the Bitcoin. And those who paid their pizzas originally with a few Bitcoins regret it dearly today, even though perhaps with a good sense of humor. You basically paid your several $1 million of today's money. So
that's very true. Yes, blockchain is a term that I think most people have heard, very much linked to Bitcoin, but there are many other applications. In a way, it's helped to promote that term and create a certain understanding. In another respect, it may not all be positive, because the fluctuations of Bitcoin, and there are people that have lost money with Bitcoin, or have been disappointed anyway. But let's talk a little bit about what you see as being the other potential uses of blockchain. I liked your example with the book, and I had never come across that before, but that makes absolute sense. I really like that. Where else do you think that blockchain is being used and can be used in the future?
I honestly think that it can be used everywhere for everything. I mean, it seems to be a broad statement, but whether you're in financial, in fintech, or if you are in manufacturing, or you're in publishing, or you are in, God knows what, NFTs, art, blockchain is always about making sure that the information you've given to your client is secure, that the client can access it, that the partners of the clients can access it, and then cannot be tampered.
Tampered with, yes.
Yes.
That's a really important part, isn't it?
Exactly. And a lot of people are currently worried about, for example, the rise of quantum computing, and some think, but you know what, the blockchain, the hashes of the blockchain, and will not resist the calculation powers of quantum computing. Well, I can tell you, I've actually asked a specialist this week, because I wanted a feedback from someone who actually deals with that and said, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, since 1978, there are algorithms which are even better than military-grade algorithms, which are not used because the military cannot even afford, in some cases, some of them, and which do exist. And that's even prior to the birth of algorithms, which would be created with the use, the power of quantum computing. So no, the chain will, what it will happen is that the algorithm to create the blocks will be even stronger in the years to come. It will be even more difficult to tamper with them, and therefore the chains will be solid. So to answer to go back to your original question, from the moment that we know that the chains, because there is not one single blockchain, there is lots of blockchain, and blockchains with different abilities and connecting capabilities even between themselves. Most blockchain technologies, blockchains don't talk to each other, but that's just for the time being. In the future, they will talk. So long as these chains, like the one used by Scott and Stewart since 1991, is solid and continues to exist, any information that is put on the blockchain will last as long as the pharaoh's granite blocks and the information that they put on them. And in fact, this is the title of my first article in the book, because I made a comparison with the cryptographic system ancient Egyptian used with hieroglyphics, putting them on the granite.
That's interesting. Yes.
Blocks. And then today, which was centralized, and that the information was centralized, cryptographic, and not accessible to anyone. Whereas blockchain is the reverse. It's decentralized, it's in digital blocks, and it is accessible to everyone, and it will hopefully last as long. That is 3,000 or 5,000 years, depending on where you look at it. Yes. So yes, so long as the chain continue, anyone doing any business about anything can actually make sure that this information is secure, cannot be tampered with. That's very important. This is what originally triggered Scott and Stewart to create this. They wanted a system that where the information in the documents could not be altered, that the chain of documents that were stacked, scanned. You remember the machines, the Xerox machines in the 90s. You could actually put a pile of documents, feed it in the machine, and it would digitalize it instantly. And I'm a former employee of the French Ministry of Culture. We were actually using that sort of thing for gigantic archives at the time in 1992. So that everything would be scanned, digitalized. But at the time, we didn't have the blockchain technology to actually hash the whole thing and make sure that if anyone, for example, the advantage of the hash is that if you have a contract and your partner makes contracts for you and then gives it to you, and then you sign it, and you have the good idea to hash it, to put it on the blockchain, and you return it to your partner who happens to be not very honest, perhaps. If he changes anything in the contract, even after first reading, that is before you sign, then you can rehash the contract coming in, and you will detect immediately if there is any alteration, if a single comma or a single digit, for example, in the amount of you're supposed to get, if the comma is moved one way or the other, then you would actually detect it, because the hash would never be the same. Change one single comma of millions of pages of documents, and the resulting hash, even if this one comma change, would be completely different, and you would see.
That's really interesting, because I think one of the things that I've observed, and it always seems to be the case, that new technologies create concern. And I remember when documents started to become digitized, there was this concern about them being used in court. And there was a confidence in a paper document that had been signed that actually could very easily be forged. I mean, there's, much easier.
You've nailed it completely. The Royal Society of Art asked me to write an article about the book. And if you go to that article, which is on their website, I actually cite the case where a publisher would publish a book, hash the content of the book, and therefore protect the IP. And then either the author or another publisher would come and say, no, it is our own document, it's our own idea, we had the idea before, and it's plagiarism. Then in that case, you just need to bring to the court the hashed document, which could be immediately rehashed in front of the judge, and then he would be able first to assess that at a certain date, the document was as it was. That is, that later on the publisher, to avoid judicial sanction, had actually altered it while before coming to the courts. That is, in other words, you literally carve in digital concrete the content of the text, and it cannot be altered. And then the same text can be rehashed in front of witnesses. So if, let's say, someone creates a song, we've heard the story of Ed Sheeran the other day,
Yes,
where
that's right. Yes.
If he had hashed his song and put it on the blockchain, he would never have had this problem. Although, in terms of date when this was created, of course, two people at the same time can sometimes create something similar. But this is where having a date stamp and being able to refer to an original document or text or song or photograph that was created at a given point and transferred to the chain and locked there forever, because this is what we're talking about. So there will be the blockchain as long as the internet will go on. And hopefully the internet will go on for quite some time. So as long as the internet functions and the chain is active, well, there is always a reference point. There is always a way to go back in time and say, no, on that particular day, we created that document. It is exactly as it is, and we can prove it. And this is what blockchain is about, for example.
Thinking about the sort of typical audience that I get with Bossit, a lot of people within the software sector, where do you think that the blockchain is going to be particularly applicable for them? There is always a concern when creating new innovative software solutions that you're going to get ripped off.
Absolutely.
And that happens. We all know that happens. But quite often, there is so many things going on, especially at an early stage in the business, to be able to protect everything that you do. Where do you think blockchain can be applied here to help them?
Well, the first thing, if I was a software developer and I created a new piece of code, which is actually original, the first thing I do is own my own laptop and the embedded SHA-256 algorithm to hash the code in a single string. That's what you can do without even being on the blockchain. You can do that instantly. You don't need any help for that. After that, you can pick a blockchain. You can keep that hash on a single piece of paper and transfer that hash to the blockchain of your choice. Then there are quite a few online. Some are free, some you have to pay, etc. You transfer the hashed code on the block, and that's it. And then you can prove at any time that this piece of code of yours was created at that time, and nobody will ever be able to contest that you've created at that given point. And this is in previous times when we used to create have a new idea for a patent, or when we had a manuscript for publishing, we used to put the manuscript in an envelope and send it to ourselves.
You seal it with the wax.
And with wax, you would sign across the back. Most people have no idea what I'm talking about right now. No. Generation, it's I'm talking, Martian right now. But the thing is, when I was young, this is how we would protect our manuscript. We would put it in an envelope, scotch it at the back, literally make a zigzag across the scotch. As you said, sometimes a wax seal on top, and then we would post it to ourselves. And it had legal value. Absolutely legal. So long as it was kept sealed, it could be brought to the court. The court would break the seals and check that the document was as is. Was the one claimed to be yours is actually in the book. Nowadays, you can do all of this with blockchain without doing any of that.
Much more secure.
Infinitely more secure, and can be reproduced. That's the thing. You would put the document in, but let's say you're a bit of a magician and you still find a way to open the envelope from the other side and reseal everything and that sort of thing. With the blockchain technology, it's way more complicated. So far, the only case I've ever heard of anyone breaking into the blockchain was Interpol, in association with a British university. I can't remember if it was Reading or another. Using gigantic computer power, they were able at one point to actually alter a block of the blockchain. It took in state dimension resources. It was done a single time. And of course, there is always a possibility. There's no system in the world which is 110% proof. It just doesn't exist.
No.
but it would require such gigantic resources that I think they would be spotted by the cybersecurity departments of this country if you had such a surge of power. Well, you never know. But the
Yes.
fact is, it's been only done once. It means it's possible, but it is very, very unlikely to be done. Yes.
My understanding is that the blockchain technology is improving as well, so that it's a moving target for criminals that may be aiming to try and do that. It's an incredibly difficult task that really takes it beyond the realms of possibility most of the time. I think, you know, it's a moving target, isn't it? It's improving.
Exactly that. And blockchains evolve on a daily basis. There's, as I said, there are many types of blockchains. Many blockchains use a variety of basic requirements. So I'll just resume them in 4 points: security, scalability, stability, and support safe transaction. But a lot of blockchain are not fast enough. And the big problem with storing information on the blockchain is that you can only store a very small amount of information per blockchain. And that is, in my opinion, where the blockchain will evolve. And an extension of that is the IPFS, the interplanetary filing system, about which almost nobody has heard. It's invented by Juan Bennett of Protocol Labs, and it answers for the timing already the problem of, I would like to store a document on the blockchain. How can I do that? Because you can't do that as a content, a photograph, an image, and the IPFS does that. So an interplanetary filing system, which is a sort of derivative of BitTorrent. If you've heard about BitTorrent, at one point it was used a lot by pirates to pirate films across the planet, because it chunks any film, for example, or a DVD in pieces, and would scatter it across the planet across nodes. It's the same sort of idea, but in a more legal way. So where basically, if you have a document, you chunk it in 256K octet of bits, and then it's scattered across nodes, and whoever wants to retrieve that then can pull out the image, can do reverse engineering and get it back. And just to give you an example, when President Erdogan in Turkey decided to block the Wikipedia, the IPFS community actually took a snapshot of it and put it on the IPFS, and no government can tamper with it, and it still continues to float. The disadvantage is it's not interactive. That is, it is a snapshot of Wikipedia at a given time, but it actually was a good tool to fight a dictatorship, totalitarianism, and anyone who wants to prevent others to have access to information. So this is a lot, of course, legislators are worried about that. There's a bit the fact that with the blockchain and with this sort of technologies, you can bypass laws. But on the other hand, the internet is still around the planet. We have so many users of it. And at the beginnings, people rose the same question, saying, oh, but, we won't be, So you remember what they tried to do with Google and stop it, and monopolies and that sort of stories. Yes.
But that's, if you look back through history, that seems to happen with any new form of technology. I think that it's part of the human psyche in many respects, is that we like the familiar. The unknown is a little bit scary. When electricity was introduced into people's homes, there were people there that thought that it was going to harm them, and it was going to create a lot of bad consequences in those early days. In probably the same way that we hear about a lot of the technology now. I mean, artificial intelligence. That's probably something worth us talking about, because I think that's a nice segue into that. Is that there has been a lot of concern that artificial intelligence is going to steal people's jobs. And I think that's how it's been positioned by the media a lot of the time. And it really is, it's sensationalizing one aspect, and it's ignoring a lot of the benefits. So let's talk a little bit about AI. What's been your experience with AI, and where do you think this is taking us?
Well, as a matter of fact, my consultancy specializes in the blockchain technology mainly, but where AI is concerned, I've actually done quite some work on the ethics of AI, in relation to particularly what coders put into the AI algorithms. That is, if you're a white male, beer drinking, sport loving guy, you're going to tend to do algorithms, create algorithms which sort of unconsciously, very often, or consciously or unconsciously, reproduce what you like. And this is where bias issues rose in America, because minorities and gender were segregated, or racial issues. So I worked on that for some time, and I in Parliament, I rose the question of, do we want to be governed and judged by robots, which was a very important question, because the Chinese government has implemented it. So if you do a minor crime in the street, you will be judged by a robot and by an algorithm, and there's a percentage of innocent people who will be condemned. And the answer was, well, but there will always be mistakes, but they can appeal. Have you ever seen a Chinese citizen making an appeal against a Chinese court? I've never heard about this one,
no.
but there you are. And yeah, so I'm also got concerned with the use of AI for weapons. And the Financial Times was allowed me to publish a letter just before Christmas about this topic, and made a small article on their website about the fact that we don't want to see non-human guided drones hunting for human beings across the planet. And unfortunately, it seems that there is already a precedent in Libya, which is of great concern for nations around the world. But then if we don't have ethics, if we don't understand how morally wrong that sort of thing is, and the dangers of it can lead to, yes, we can be very much worried. Now, to go back to your original question about, will it take jobs of people? Not really. In fact, it might even create more jobs, because in effect, and more intelligent jobs.
Yes, that's the really important aspect here, isn't it?
You see, the 19th century chains of workers in factories, which is inhuman to a certain extent, still continues, but it is inhuman.
Yes.
No, people could get a better education thanks to AI-driven education. They could raise to the point where it's more about controlling the machine in an intelligent way, with a human moral and human consciousness and behind it, than just thinking, oh, well, the robot in the car factory is going to take my job. We want every human being to have the best life possible. We want people to enjoy a certain amount of their lives in free time, with leisure. If you are constantly doing the job of a robot, producing endlessly the same sort of gesture,
repetitious, mundane jobs, yes.
Then how can you live your life properly? So this is wrong, and this is where AI can help us, and it can lift up humanity to actually have more time to do more intelligent things, and particularly more leisure. I mean, this is the French are very good at that. For example, they've always considered leisure as part of a right, a human right. I mean, I think they're right on that topic. We need time to think, we need time to reflect, and if we're constantly running from 9 to 5, behind the tasks we have to do, we can't grow ourselves, and humanity doesn't grow, and then it results in we don't progress, and then wars and the rest. I mean, it's all a chain, really. It's a funny thing.
Look. You make some great points there. I really like that. I mean, particularly around AI education. How often do we see that the solution to the biggest problems that we have start with education? And the idea of having AI education to be able to help people of all different types, because we all learn in different ways. The ability of AI education is that it should be able to ultimately adapt to that person and their particular learning style.
Exactly.
Whereas currently, the traditional learning, which was set up actually to feed the industrial revolution of having people in workshops where you have one person talking to maybe 40 people, they will have their particular style. And it's very difficult for a teacher to be able to have the right learning style for all of those individuals. AI education can get around that. Some people are more auditory, some people are more visual, some people are more kinesthetic in the way they want to learn. Some people want a combination of that. And AI should be able to monitor and then tailor to the needs of those individuals, which I think is fantastic. And you're right. I also think that the thing that you're saying about more leisure time relates, for instance, to stress. How much harm is stress doing? For me, stress is when I'm doing repetitious jobs.
Well, stress is one of the leading causes of cancer.
Yes.
Once you stress, you neutralize your immune system. And if you're on a high sugar diet, you open the doors for the cells to be actually to get cancer. This is a process. One of my friend, Dr. James Redding at UCL, has just been given a national grant to develop his new system to detect cancer through the immune system. So it's not only something I've experienced, because unfortunately I've had to bury several people who got cancer, but I have the immense chance to have as a friend what I think is one of our greatest scientists, even though not known for now, but it's very promising. And stress is one of the causes. There's no doubt about that. If you stress, your immune system goes down, and all the doors are open to COVID, to cancer, to all sorts of ailments. It is extremely important that a human being gets a chunk of the day for himself to rest, to reflect. And AI, this is where AI comes in, takes off the repetitive tasks,
yes,
allows you to be educated, lifts you up, and then we create some more intelligent algorithm. Of course, we have to put barriers. I mean, you know about Asimov's laws, and it is true that we don't want to be judged by robots. I don't want to be judged by in fact, I talked to a member of my family in this country, is a high judge, a former high judge, and he said there were cases where all of my 40 years experience in high courts were not sufficient. I had to ask colleagues, and we would have to pretend that we can create an algorithm which would incorporate the wisdom of 10 judges after 40 years of career. I mean, I think there's always a moment where the situation is unknown. And then at one point, are we going to be able to create algorithms which are perfectly capable to improvise, or not improvise, that is, innovate in a area where our precedents in justice have never been, and considering the new technologies coming in, this sort of situation will happen more and more, like facial recognition. Yes. I mean, it was really interesting to see that Dame Cressida, who's a great, of course, a metropolitan, police person, got it wrong, because she actually at one point, because she said, well, in north of London we need to put AI facial recognition cameras because it will prevent knife crimes in northern London and it allows us to catch them. But the thing is, she didn't realize that by wanting to do it was actually breaching our private or a well, how to say this, or right to privacy. The right to walk in the streets without being filmed and recognized. Because the problem with AI recognition, facial recognition, is that you can go and see a friend of yours, and then the police would know what time you went in, what time you came out. We have a right of privacy. I don't say that cameras cannot be useful. Of course they can. But we really have to understand where we put them and whether, first, Parliament has agreed. You just can't put them as you wish. And, as you decide to put them in northern London like that. Well, in fact, immediately the answer from Parliament and various committees was, no, we can't do that. And first, Parliament needs to legislate. And this is where we are.
But that's all to do. I mean, and this is where I think you're playing a really good part here. And I commend you for that, is because you're helping with the understanding around these technologies. And that's the really important thing, is how can you legislate for something that you don't understand? You need to understand the potential dangers, and there are potential dangers in anything new coming in, but you need to understand them. But there are also a lot of positives. One of the things that I've sort of have in the utmost of my mind, because I'm monitoring myself. I've got 2 devices on my wrist. You'll be able to see there.
Yes, I can see that.
Which is, it's not this watch. It's monitoring. I train, and I'm able to monitor what I'm eating. But most importantly, something I've been aware of is my sleep. And I see this in a lot of senior executives in the software sector, very motivated, working very, very hard, and are suffering from stress to varying degrees. And some of them are very good at managing that stress. But often, if I speak to them and say, how much sleep do you get on average? The typical answer is 5 to 6 hours.
Yeah.
Whereas we know to be at optimum, you need to be 8, maybe sometimes for some people even 9 hours if you're physically and mentally active.
Yes.
That creates stress in itself.
Yes.
And having AI that can take some of that workload to give you more freedom, to give you more free time, it can only be a good thing.
But I'm going to give you a very extraordinary example, as a matter of fact, perhaps not the best one in a way, but when my father became very successful with his concrete technology company, whenever he used to have the equivalent of £1 million in his bank account, he would stop working. And with my mother, they were touring the world, spending every cent of it and coming back. Of course, it drove my brother, who was vice president at the time, completely mad and said, your money is not the company's money. I said, no, it is, as a matter of fact, because he was a 20th century man with a certain way of doing things. But in the end, they had 10 or 12 years of wonderful life across the planet. And,
Yes.
and the other thing is, when I was in Hong Kong talking to 300 top CEOs of the concrete industry, and I think it was Hargraves at the time who was leading Semtech, and asked me, but I don't understand, Christian, your company's been going on for 30 years now. How come it's not bigger? And I could not answer, well, while you're sitting here, guys, my father and my mother are on a cruise around the planet, enjoying their, and how do you answer that? Of course, for a company management, it's a disaster, but because particularly if you have many, he had only a few employees, he reduced it to the minimum by licensing. It was his model was perfect in this sense. He wanted to enjoy life. But of course, if you have many employees and a larger company, that sort of business model doesn't work. But the point is, my best friend said that your father was extremely intelligent. And he said, well, I think he was, because he, towards the end of his life, after a long life, working as an engineer, he found a way to give himself time and space with my mother. They loved each other, and they went around the world. And also, he fought a bank 10 years before that. We have to say that for 10 years before, he fought a French bank and won in court, and that took an enormous toll on them. So they decided that the remaining part of their life, whatever they would earn, they would use it for their passion, which was traveling, learning, growing. And this is what they did. But of course, the model is rather bizarre. And I couldn't say that.
Well, I don't think it's common, but I wouldn't say it's bizarre. I think it's very smart. Designing the life that you actually want to live.
Exactly that.
That's a smart thing to do.
And I think this can be done with little money. It's a question of time. Time is the important thing. The money, of course, to help. But you can be very happy on an island writing your books with a small revenue of a tech you've sold, actually. And you can give yourself a salary over many years, giving yourself time to grow, to write, to publish, and do the very thing for which you're designed. And not the thing that, like my father, he had to do. After the war, my grandfather was dead, and the money dwindled during the Second World War, and he had to support the family. And he wanted to be an opera singer, and he had a very beautiful voice. But the fact is, he thought, no, I need to be responsible. I have 3 women. My uncle is old now at home, and my sister, and I need to help. And so he went to Imperial College to do a BSc, and one of the first MA in plastics, as a matter of fact, which gave him immediately a job in Brazil, of all places. Imagine, you had to jump on the boat and go all the way. So the first part, I would say a large part of his life was about sustaining himself, like many people post-war. And at one point, when he was in his 60s, because of the technology he developed since the 70s, so we're in the 80s, he was able to license, get a revenue which was sufficient enough to give him time, to give the space he needed to do the things he've always dreamt to do in his lifetime, that is travel. And both of them had this as a... So today, of course, now he's dead. He died just before the lockdown. But the thing is, when my mother looks back, and when they looked back not so long, like a few years ago, they say, oh, all right, we're certainly not rich anymore, but we have such a vast amount of extraordinary memories where our life has been fulfilled, and he went in peace. He went in peace. Yeah,
that's fantastic. I mean, yes, to be able to look back on your life, and I'm sure that would have been a very fulfilling part of his life, and that's the important part. He gave himself the time to really enjoy it.
And using tech.
Yeah. What could he do with the tech that we're now starting to see moving forward. I'm sure he would have been one of those people that really would have wanted to leverage that. How much do you think that your father's attitude to business and life has influenced you?
Oh, very much so. I regret. This is why I'm a one-person. I'm a consultant. I could have partners, and maybe I might have if I find people with whom I could work. But I like to be a one-person band, as I would say, and independent, who
Yes.
cannot be influenced. I cannot be influenced by government or political parties or anything of that sort, because as a consultant, I want to give a very honest and fair advice about the good and the bad of any technology for my clients, so that their return on investments are quick and they are clean and they're ethically correct. I like that very much. So independence is one thing I learned from my father, financial independence. And second, yeah, I'm following the same path in a way. I might not do exactly what he did with the money, but the fact is, I'm developing new blockchain technologies. I have 4 of them. One MVP I mentioned, which is with my solicitors, about for certification of legal documents, and it functions. And we're trying to see if we can collaborate to license precisely companies. And that's the model I will follow. We've always thought that licensing technologies was a great, in the concrete industry, we saved ourselves so much time. We had a factory in Portugal. We were producing, I think, of our concentrates about, I don't know, tens of thousands of tons per year, which mixed with the concrete at a rate of 3%, allowed millions of tons of concrete to be poured all over the world. We built from the atomic station, the French atomic station Murat, which we helped save when they did very silly things over there, down to Jersey seawall, Bear Castle Island, Cartagena front seawall in Mexico. We did projects all over the world, and we learned gradually that our agents were making more money with our technology, selling it in terms of material than we did. So we changed our model completely, and we decided that licensing the technology was faster, quicker, and allowed also for development. We were less thinking about supply chain production, making sure that the Portuguese plant was functioning, rather than developing the formulae, improving them. And we didn't have AI at the time. If we had AI today, we would have fed all the chemicals in the AI, and I would love to see what would have come out, in terms of result. We were doing this intellectually. I remember my father waking up usually around 4 in the morning and starting to think chemistry, then send his hypothesis to the lab we had in London, and sometimes a fax would come back and saying, you've achieved something extraordinary there, because it's unknown in the industry. And that's the way it happened. You see, sometimes just thinking, just sitting and having the time to think. So he would do that between 4 and 8 in the morning, usually. That was the time when he would wake up, reflect, and then would write the chemistry, send it, and then we would, in some cases, well, the licenses we were selling were $1.2 million per license. So we're not talking of, so we're not talking of small licenses. And well, this is, he found the right balance. I think every one of us has to find the right balance within our environment to be able to fulfill ourselves. And it's when we connect all of that, that we're great and we're happy and we're structured and we progress, particularly, and we make the others progress. We can help. And in fact, I recommend to listener a book, an extraordinary book I've just read called The Boy Who Played with Fusion. It's the extraordinary story of Taylor, who by the age of 12, if I'm not wrong, in Nevada University achieved nuclear fusion. And this is a fit in human history. Obama met him and so on. But what I find the book extraordinary for is not only about Taylor himself, is the fact that the journalist who's written it, and whose name I forget temporarily, has actually embedded the major issues you were mentioning earlier about self-tailored education. Yes. Many of us have special aptitudes which the current educational system of governmental across the world cannot fulfill. If you're a bright kid, of whatever your background is, and color and gender or whatever, you are put in a common denominator education, which
Yes.
actually ruins you.
Yes.
The chance Taylor had is that his parents understood that and pushed him up, even in an area which was basically playing with radioactive material in his back garden, you know, and his garage. And
Yes.
that led to, achieving nuclear fission very early, but particularly he was after using, precisely like Dr. James Redding, using nuclear isotopic elements to detect faults in the immune system of people. And one of the reasons he wanted to do this is because he loved his grandmother and who supported him in his research. And his grandmother died of cancer, and he could not do anything. So he actually went that direction. He's only in his 20s right now. I don't know if he'll ever achieve what he wanted to do. And it's not always that we want to do, you know, we have a name and we don't always succeed. But the intention is right. The use of new technologies is right. And he's invented actually one of the best detecting systems in the world for airports using radioactive material. He won a national prize in the United States at the age of 14 or 15.
Wow.
If children of this sort were actually singled out more often, pushed and helped with a tailored education, we would have extraordinary people doing extraordinary things.
You know, I couldn't agree with you more. I've seen personally people that have exceptional talent, but they view themselves in a negative way because the education system has not worked for them, and they've sort of seen themselves as a failure, and they've set their expectations low because of it. And I always have this belief, you will never, ever exceed your own level of self-expectation. And it's such a shame because they've got incredible talent. In fact, most people have talents, hidden talents a lot of the time.
Absolutely.
And the education system should be to find those talents and help them breathe, rather than to try and treat everybody in the same way. And
I mean, in the case of Taylor, he had to do that exactly. There was one point in his secondary education in America where they told him, you got to do that because this is the system. And the kid was bored in classroom. He was actually, and in the end, the teacher got so fed up during physics classes that he knew better, that she gave him the right to teach students, and he loved it. But otherwise, he would have literally died intellectually. He would have stagnated, and he would never have become. So for one Taylor, who succeeds or who is helped because of extraordinary parents and circumstances, how many do we lose? Girls and boys every year because they are not supported adequately, that we don't understand that some kids are totally different and have different capacities.
I remember being told a story by my grandfather. He had led quite an interesting life. He'd been in the army before the Second World War, so he was a regular soldier, and he was part of British intelligence within the army. But when he was at school, at the age of about 12 or 13, his teacher told him, we've taught you all we can, and actually you're getting in the way a little bit. Go and help the caretaker. For the rest of his time at school, he was helping the caretaker because they couldn't teach him anymore.
Yes. And I think they could have just told him, go home and read books.
Yes.
And feed yourself, because we are not capable of, we're not at your level anymore. And you are way ahead of us. And that would be the worst of the situation. What he needs is to be put with other kids in some institutions, which allows, and in fact, the book tells about, I think, the special school where Taylor was put, called by a couple, husband and wife, Davidson or Robertson, I can't remember their name, who created an entire school tailored for kids of that sort, allowing them to grow and tailor literally their education depending on what they needed. And the results are outstanding. I mean, absolutely outstanding. And the book is very good about that because it has, even at the end of it, he sums up all the educational reforms we need to do. So you buy a book, you think it's a biography about a kid who's just brilliant. And they've actually made it a book about reflecting where the modern 21st century education should go. And I think there is a lot. How many kids do you know around you who go to this sort of special school? I don't know any. I've never met anyone telling me, oh, you know what, if you've got a little bright kid with you, you can send him or her to that particular school. Not at all. We wouldn't know. Even if it existed, we wouldn't know, because the system is 19th century teaching, as you were saying, one teacher, the kids, and it's a windmill of words and teaching.
It's a factory. It's trying to turn people out for how society was, back in the 19th century. It doesn't fit anymore. No. Christian, it's been brilliant speaking to you. We've covered a lot of topics today, which is great. I like the conversations to go like that, and it was a flow. And it surprised me where we got to. We ended up talking about education, and I can see that you're very passionate about these topics, which is great. And I think also you've got a lot more to talk about. So I'd like to invite you back at some stage, and we'll have another conversation. We will continue this, because I very much enjoyed the podcast with you today. I like to see people who are passionate about the subject and are willing to really say what they think, which you did. So if somebody wants to reach out to you, this is the bit where you get to pitch a little bit about you and what you do, because this is going to go out to thousands of people. Just give us sort of a 30-second. How are they going to get a hold of you? What sort of business are you looking for?
Well, first, to get in contact with me is super easy. Projectis.co.uk. Projectis.co.uk. In fact, I think if you type Projectis Consultants Limited on Google, it comes up, and you can find all the details. Now, if you have a business and you want to get into the modern era that we're facing right now, which combines blockchain, AI, IPFS, metaverse, NFTs, and so on, I will be delighted to literally boost your business in that direction with my partners. Very often, I may be a one-person consultancy, but I have agreements with companies like Performanta, Corporate System in Silicon Valley, and so many others. I tailor a solution for the needs you have, but where I'm very, very good at, I think, is to innovate in areas where people have not innovating. So I'm not going to say, oh, I've got a tailored solution for you, or we can tailor a solution for you. I'm extremely interested in pushing the boundaries of what we know, what we can do in any given area. I love when people come and tell me, you know what, we've got this problem, we don't know how to solve it. If you are in that situation and you think that a technology could actually help you, I'm sure with the portfolio of knowledge and partners I have, I'll be delighted to hear from you, because I really like solving technology problems. That really gives me a kick. I like the book is a world first book on the blockchain for the publishing industry. This is brilliant. I love to do a lot of other world first in various areas, and one shouldn't be always worried about innovating, because there is that aspect. A lot of companies think, oh, you know what, we don't want to go too fast. We don't know about innovating. We'd rather have something extremely solid to do things better. This is possible. But I'll tell you what, businesses which do something that other businesses don't do have the edge, and have, as you know, way more sellable in the end. Have something which is unique. And that's what
very, very, very important. Mm-hmm. Well done, Christian. I enjoyed that, and I know that a lot of the people that listen to this podcast will also do. So thank you very much for that, and we'll definitely be inviting you back.
Well, great pleasure.
That was today's podcast with Christian, and I hope, as I did, that you enjoyed it. If you have questions that you'd like to put to Christian or to myself, please do reach out to us. If there are topics that you would like me to cover, or if you feel that you've got an interesting story to tell and you'd like to come onto this podcast, please reach out to me. I'm always waiting to hear. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.